In the heart of Texas, where trust is as sacred as Sunday service, one man's world shattered with a single lab report. Deputy Sheriff Everett Langley discovered the daughter he'd raised for 16 years wasn't his biological child. A revelation that transformed a respected lawman into a calculated killer. Red Bluff, with a population of 8,000, was the kind of town where family names carried weight and secrets were supposed to stay buried. But when 16-year-old Willow Langley submitted a routine DNA sample for a school project, she unknowingly lit the fuse on a powder keg of deception that had been silently ticking for years. The consequences would leave one man dead, a family destroyed, and an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about the people they called neighbors. If you've ever wondered how well you really know the people closest to you, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Some truths, once revealed, can never be contained, and the price of discovery can be fatal. Red Bluff sits nestled between rolling hills and sprawling ranches, about 40 miles outside of Austin. The kind of place where the same families have occupied the same pews at First Baptist for generations. Main Street features a courthouse built in 1892, a diner that's been serving the same pecan pie recipe since 1954, and exactly one traffic light that blinks yellow after 10 p.m. Summer days stretch long and hot, with temperatures climbing past 100 degrees by mid-June. Locals gather at Cooley's Diner for morning coffee, where conversations flow between tables and everyone's business becomes communal knowledge, or at least the parts they choose to share. The sheriff's department occupies a modest brick building across from the courthouse. Inside, Deputy Sheriff Everett Langley's desk sits closest to Sheriff Hank Pritchard's office, a position of honor earned through 15 years of dedicated service. At 42, Everett stood as a pillar of the community, coach of the Junior Baseball League, deacon at church, and the officer parents pointed to when telling their children what a good man looks like. The Langley home on Mockingbird Lane was equally admired, a two-story colonial with a wraparound porch where Marin Langley hosted the annual 4th of July barbecue. Their daughter Willow excelled in school, particularly in art and science. The family portraits hanging in their living room showed 3 smiling faces, Everett with his arm around Marin, Willow front and center, the perfect American family in a perfect American town. But those who looked closer might have noticed how Marin's smile rarely reached her eyes these days. How Everett worked increasingly longer shifts, volunteering for overnight patrols. How conversations between husband and wife had grown shorter, more functional than intimate. At church socials, they stood together but somehow apart, maintaining appearances while a gulf widened between them. Marin had taken to spending more time at the library where she worked, often staying late to catalog new arrivals. Everett noticed but said nothing, burying his concerns beneath layers of pride and routine. But beneath this seemingly perfect facade, hairline fractures were spreading through the foundation of the Langley marriage, invisible until the moment everything would collapse. Everett Langley grew up hunting and fishing along the same creek beds his grandfather had shown his father decades earlier. The son of a highway patrolman, he'd known since childhood that he would wear a badge someday. His father's sudden death from a heart attack when Everett was just 19 cemented this path, a way to honor the family legacy while providing the stability his mother desperately needed after becoming a widow. At the police academy, Everett graduated top of his class in marksmanship and procedural law. His instructors noted his methodical approach to problem-solving and unwavering commitment to rules. These traits served him well as he rose through the ranks in Red Bluff, earning commendations for drug busts and a dramatic rescue during the flood of 2010. Beneath his composed exterior, Everett harbored a deep-seated need for control. His home office featured meticulously organized case files. His patrol vehicle remained spotless. His uniform was always pressed to perfection. This rigidity extended to his expectations of others, especially his family. He didn't tolerate disorder or unpredictability, viewing both as personal failures. Marin Whitfield had been Red Bluff's golden girl, valedictorian with dreams of becoming a literature professor at UT Austin. She'd met Everett during her first semester of college when she returned home for Thanksgiving break. Their courtship was swift and traditional. By summer, she wore his ring. By fall, she'd withdrawn from university to plan their wedding. For years, Marin told herself the sacrifice was worth it. She found purpose in motherhood when Willow arrived, and later satisfaction in her work at the library. But at night, she sometimes pulled out the acceptance letters from graduate programs she'd never attended, wondering about the parallel life where she'd pursued her own ambitions. At 41, Marin had grown restless. The library job that once felt like a connection to her abandoned dreams now highlighted their distance. She'd begun taking online courses in literature, hiding the tuition payments from Everett, who believed higher education was fine for some, but unnecessary for a mother and wife. 16-year-old Willow Langley inherited her father's analytical mind and her mother's creative spirit, a combination that made her exceptional at both science and art. Tall and thoughtful with copper-brown hair, she navigated high school with quiet confidence, neither part of the popular crowd nor bothered by her exclusion from it. Willow sensed the tension between her parents but interpreted it through a teenager's self-centered lens, assuming their strained conversations related to her curfew or college plans rather than deeper marital issues. She adored her father's strength and stability while connecting with her mother through books and art projects. Unknowingly, she had become the primary reason her parents' marriage continued. Dr. Felix Navarro arrived in Red Bluff 3 years ago, taking over the family practice when old Dr. Gunderson retired. At 44, the San Antonio native brought sophisticated charm to town with his wire-rimmed glasses and collection of vintage medical texts. His divorce was recent and messy. His ex-wife had left him for his former medical partner, a betrayal that prompted his search for a fresh start in a smaller community. Felix found unexpected peace in Red Bluff's slower pace. He joined the library board where he met Marin, and they bonded over shared literary interests and conversations about lives not lived. What began as intellectual friendship gradually evolved into something more complex and dangerous. Have you ever sensed something was off in a relationship but couldn't quite place it? That subtle shift when conversations become performances and silences grow heavy with unspoken words? For the Langleys, these warning signs had been flashing for years, but no one was prepared for what would happen when they could no longer be ignored. Ms. Hernandez's advanced biology class buzzed with excitement when she announced their participation in the National Genomic Education Initiative. This program will give you hands-on experience with cutting-edge genetic science, she explained, distributing consent forms. Each student will receive a personalized genetic profile showing ancestry percentages, inherited traits, and basic health markers. For Willow, the project seemed straightforward, a chance to earn extra credit and potentially include the results in her college applications. The collection process was simple: a cheek swab sealed in a sterile tube, labeled with her participant number, and shipped to a lab in Houston. 6 weeks later, the results arrived. Students eagerly compared their ancestry percentages and discovered unexpected connections to distant countries. Willow's report showed predominantly Western European heritage, which matched what she knew of her family background. But as she scrolled through the detailed genetic markers section, something caught her attention. The report flagged an inconsistency in her paternal genetic markers. A note explained that certain inherited traits didn't align with the expected pattern based on her reported family history. Confused, Willow approached Ms. Hernandez after class. "It's probably just an error in how you filled out the family history section," her teacher suggested. "But if you're curious, you could always do a follow-up test." That evening, Willow showed the results to her mother. "Look at this weird note about paternal markers. Should I ask Dad about it?" The color drained from Marin's face. Her hands trembled as she took the tablet, eyes scanning the report repeatedly as if hoping the words might rearrange themselves. "Mom? What's wrong?" Marin pulled Willow into her bedroom and closed the door. "You can't show this to your father," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, Willow. Promise me." "But why?" "It's just some science project." "It's complicated," Marin said, tears forming. "I need time to figure this out. Please just trust me." Confused and increasingly alarmed, Willow reluctantly agreed. For 3 days the secret hung between them. Marin grew distracted, jumping at sounds and checking her phone constantly. Willow noticed her mother having hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when anyone entered the room. On the 4th day, Everett was searching for the spare car keys in Marin's dresser when he found a printout of Willow's genetic report folded between sweaters. Initially skimming it casually, his attention snagged on the flagged inconsistency. He read it once, twice, 3 times, each reading deepening the furrow in his brow. That evening, after Willow went to bed, Everett placed the report on the kitchen table where Marin was grading library inventory sheets. "What is this?" His voice was dangerously quiet. Marin's pen froze mid-stroke. "Everett, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That my daughter isn't mine? That you've been lying to me for 16 years? She is your daughter in every way that matters," Marin pleaded. "Who is he?" Everett's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. The silence stretched between them until Marin whispered a name: Felix. Everett's expression hardened into something Marin had never seen before. "Felix Navarro? The doctor?" His laugh was hollow. "How long?" "It was just once," Marin said. During that rough patch when you were working the Border Drug Task Force. You were gone for months, barely calling. I was lonely and you decided our marriage vows were optional? Everett's voice rose. You decided to destroy everything we built? As their argument escalated, neither noticed Willow standing in the hallway, hand pressed against her mouth, hearing every devastating word. This story takes a dark turn. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The morning after the confrontation, Everett called in sick for the first time in 8 years. He spent the day in his shed, methodically cleaning his hunting rifles, then his service weapon, then his collection of pocket knives, a ritual that had always calmed him. But the repetitive motions brought no peace, only a deepening coldness that settled in his chest. When he returned to work 3 days later, his colleagues immediately noticed the difference. The easy smile was gone, replaced by tight-lipped nods. His uniform, typically immaculate, showed wrinkles. During morning briefing, Sheriff Pritchard had to repeat questions twice before Everett responded. Everything okay at home? Deputy Ramirez asked during their patrol. Fine, Everett replied, staring straight ahead through the windshield. By the second week, rumors circulated through the department. Everett had snapped at the dispatcher for a minor miscommunication. He'd pulled over 17 vehicles in one shift, all for trivial infractions like broken tail lights or rolling stops. The citations he wrote contained errors, something previously unheard of in his meticulous paperwork. At home, silence dominated the Langley household. Everett slept in the guest room. Meals became solitary affairs, with family members eating at different times to avoid each other. When forced to interact, Everett addressed Willow with a stiff formality that broke her heart. He spoke to Marin only when absolutely necessary, his words clipped and cold. Marin tried once to discuss the future. We need to talk about what happens now, she said, finding him alone in the kitchen late one night. There's nothing to discuss, he replied, not looking up from his coffee. You made your choice 16 years ago. The changes didn't go unnoticed in Red Bluff. At Cooley's diner, conversations hushed when Everett entered alone for his morning coffee, no longer joining the usual table of deputies and firefighters. At church, the Langleys arrived in separate cars and sat in different pews. When Pastor Mills asked if everything was all right, Everett simply said, "Just going through some family matters," in a tone that discouraged further questions. Willow withdrew into herself, skipping art club and turning down invitations from friends. Her grades slipped. She spent hours alone in her room, headphones on, sketching dark, fragmented images. When her best friend Lila finally confronted her, Willow broke down. "It's all my fault," she sobbed. "If I hadn't done that stupid DNA test, everything would still be normal." "How is this your fault?" Lila asked, confused. Willow couldn't bring herself to explain. The truth felt too heavy, too private, too devastating to share, even with her closest friend. Meanwhile, Dr. Felix Navarro watched the situation unfold with mounting anxiety. He'd received a cryptic text from Marin. "He knows. I'm sorry." Then nothing for days. His calls went unanswered. When he spotted Marin at the grocery store, she turned and walked in the opposite direction, fear evident in her hurried steps. After 2 weeks of silence, Felix decided he needed to address the situation directly. As a doctor, he understood the dangers of allowing emotional wounds to fester. As the unwitting catalyst for this family crisis, he felt responsible for attempting to mitigate the damage. He wrote a letter to Everett, choosing his words carefully. "Deputy Langley, I understand you've recently received information that has caused significant pain to you and your family. While I cannot undo the past, I would like to meet with you privately to discuss the situation as two adults. My role in these events was brief and long ago, but I recognize the impact it has had on your life. Please call my office to arrange a time. Respectfully, Dr. Navarro." He hand-delivered the sealed envelope to the sheriff's department, leaving it with the front desk clerk. The next day, Felix received a response. His letter returned, torn in half, in his office mailbox. That weekend, Felix doubled the security measures at his home, installing motion sensor lights and checking that his alarm system functioned properly. Something about Everett's silence frightened him more than any confrontation would have. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. August 17th arrived with a thunderstorm that matched the town's mood, oppressive heat broken by violent bursts of rain. Lightning illuminated the Texas sky in jagged pulses as thunder rolled across Red Bluff. By midnight, the storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy stillness and air thick with moisture. Felix Navarro sat in his study, a glass of bourbon on his desk, reviewing patient files to distract himself from the tension that had consumed his life for weeks. His Victorian-style home on the outskirts of town stood isolated among oak trees, its nearest neighbor a quarter-mile away. The crunch of tires on wet gravel cut through the silence. Felix glanced at his security app, seeing a county sheriff's vehicle in his driveway. His heart rate quickened as he recognized Everett Langley stepping out, uniform crisp despite the late hour, posture military straight. The doorbell rang once, its chime echoing through the house. Felix straightened his shirt, took a steadying breath and opened the door. "Deputy Langley," Felix said, keeping his voice neutral. "It's late." "Doctor," Everett replied, his face expressionless. "May I come in?" "Official business." Felix hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." In the study, Everett declined the offered seat, instead standing with his back to the bookshelves, eyes scanning the room, noting the medical diplomas, the family photos with Felix's parents, the absence of any pictures with Marin or Willow. "What can I help you with?" Felix asked, remaining behind his desk. 16 years, Everett said quietly. 16 years I've raised a child that isn't mine. Felix maintained eye contact. "Willow is a remarkable young woman. You should be proud of the role you've played in her life." "Don't," Everett's voice hardened. "Don't tell me about my daughter." "I never intended to cause harm to your family," Felix said. "What happened with Marin was a mistake? A moment of weakness." Everett's laugh held no humor. "That's what she called it too. It was one night, Everett. One night 16 years ago. One night that destroyed everything." Everett's hand moved to rest on his holstered weapon. "Did you know? All these years, did you know Willow was yours?" "No," Felix shook his head emphatically. "I had no idea until Marin texted me recently. I would never have kept that secret. But you moved to our town. Joined the library board where my wife works. Pure coincidence. Red Bluff needed a doctor, and I needed a fresh start after my divorce." Everett stepped closer. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth," Felix said, rising slowly from his chair. "Everett, I understand your anger. But this doesn't have to define Willow's future or yours." "My future." Everett's voice dropped to a whisper. "My future was stolen the moment you slept with my wife." The movement was swift, Everett's service weapon clearing its holster in one fluid motion. Felix raised his hands, palms forward. "Think about what you're doing," Felix urged. "This isn't who you are." "You don't know who I am," Everett replied, his finger moving to the trigger. The gunshot thundered in the confined space. Felix collapsed, a red stain blooming across his blue shirt. His eyes registered shock, then pain, then a final understanding as he slumped against his desk. Everett stood motionless, watching as the life drained from the other man's face. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. After several minutes, Everett holstered his weapon and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Langley," he said, voice steady. "I need to report an officer-involved shooting at 1478 Oakwood Drive. Suspect is down. Send medical and backup." What would you do if your entire life was built on a lie? Texas Ranger Odessa Pike arrived in Red Bluff the morning after the shooting. At 48, she'd spent 20 years with the Rangers, specializing in cases involving law enforcement officers. Her reputation preceded her: methodical, incorruptible, and impossible to intimidate. Sheriff Pritchard met her at the crime scene, still secured with yellow tape. "Appreciate you coming, Ranger. Hate to have one of our own involved in something like this." Pike nodded, her expression revealing nothing as she surveyed the room. "Walk me through what we know." Everett's statement claimed self-defense, that Felix had reached for a letter opener during a heated discussion about personal matters. But Pike's initial assessment raised questions. The letter opener lay on the desk's far side, out of Felix's reach. The entry wound suggested Felix had been seated when shot, not advancing as claimed. "Blood spatter doesn't match a standing confrontation," Pike noted, pointing to the patterns on the desk and floor. "And where are the signs of struggle?" The forensics team documented everything: the single shell casing, the angle of the bullet's trajectory, the position of furniture. They collected gunshot residue samples, fingerprints, and fibers. Pike personally examined Everett's service weapon and uniform, finding no defensive marks or indications of physical altercation. "His story's not adding up," she told her partner as they left the scene. "Let's find out what this personal matter was about." Pike's investigation expanded outward. She interviewed the dispatcher who took Everett's call, noting the unusual calm in his voice immediately after a supposedly life-threatening encounter. She spoke with deputies who described Everett's recent behavioral changes. He was always by the book, Deputy Ramirez explained. But lately he seemed cold, distant. Writing tickets for every minor violation, volunteering for extra shifts like he couldn't stand being home. Neighbors near Felix's house reported hearing no shouting before the gunshot, only the brief sound of conversation, then the deafening report of a firearm. One neighbor mentioned seeing Everett's patrol car parked down the road earlier that evening, hours before the reported time of the incident. The breakthrough came when Pike interviewed Willow's biology teacher, who mentioned the DNA testing project. This led Pike to discover the genetic report and its implications. When confronted with this information, Marin broke down and revealed everything: the affair 16 years ago, Everett's discovery of Willow's paternity, and the threatening atmosphere that had engulfed their home. Did Everett ever explicitly threaten Dr. Navarro? Pike asked. Not in words, Marin replied, hands trembling. But I know my husband. The way he went quiet, that's when he's most dangerous. As details leaked, Red Bluff fractured along loyalty lines. Many stood firmly behind Everett, a respected officer who'd served the community faithfully for years, now betrayed in the worst possible way. They gathered at Cooley's diner, sharing stories of times Everett had helped them, arguing that any man might snap under similar circumstances. Others demanded justice for Felix, pointing to his contributions as the town's only doctor and his reputation for compassion. They left flowers outside his now-closed practice, with notes thanking him for his service. The division grew uglier when someone spray-painted "Murderer" on the Langley's mailbox, prompting a counter-response of blue ribbons tied to trees throughout the neighborhood in support of Everett. Pike ignored the town politics, focusing instead on building her case. The evidence painted a clear picture: premeditation, not self-defense. The timeline suggested Everett had watched Felix's house before approaching. The forensics contradicted his statement about a struggle. The motive was undeniable. 7 days after the shooting, Pike arrived at the sheriff's department with an arrest warrant. Everett was charged with first-degree murder. He planned this, Pike told the district attorney. He used his position, his knowledge of procedure, and his understanding of how to stage a scene. But he made mistakes, the kind people make when they're acting on emotion rather than reason. If you're finding this case as fascinating as I do, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have spotted the inconsistencies in Everett's story? The state of Texas versus Everett Langley drew media attention far beyond Red Bluff. Television vans lined the courthouse square, reporters from Dallas and Houston filed daily updates, and true crime podcasters dissected every development. The case hit a nerve, combining badge betrayal, family secrets, and small-town dynamics into an irresistible narrative. Court sessions began in January, 6 months after the shooting. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Vanessa Cortez, built their case methodically. This was not a moment of passion, she told the jury in opening statements. This was calculated revenge executed by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate a crime scene. Defense attorney Maxwell Bennett, brought in from Austin at considerable expense, pursued a two-pronged strategy, emphasizing Everett's unblemished service record and arguing for diminished capacity due to extreme emotional distress. Deputy Langley experienced a psychological break triggered by a devastating revelation, Bennett argued. 16 years of fatherhood, erased in an instant. Who among us can truly comprehend such trauma? The courtroom fell silent when Marin took the stand. Once respected as a librarian and community volunteer, she now faced hostile stares and whispered judgments. Her testimony detailed the affair, a brief connection during a period when Everett had been assigned to a multi-month border operation. I made a terrible mistake, she testified, voice barely audible. But Felix didn't deserve to die for it. Neither of us knew about Willow until the DNA test. Under cross-examination, Bennett forced Marin to admit she'd deliberately concealed Willow's paternity for 16 years. You maintain this deception daily, correct? Looking your husband in the eye while denying him the truth about his family? Throughout the proceedings, 16-year-old Willow sat with her maternal grandmother, her face a mask of grief. School had become impossible. Classmates either avoided her or pestered her with intrusive questions. Her art teacher reported finding her sketches increasingly disturbing, filled with fractured family portraits and shadowy figures. After 8 days of testimony and 14 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Everett to 15 years with possibility of parole after 7. As the verdict was read, Everett stood motionless, his expression unchanged. Marin wept quietly. Willow left the courtroom before sentencing, unable to bear the formal dissolution of her family. Outside the courthouse, the community's reaction mirrored its division. Some supporters maintained a vigil with candles and prayers for Everett's eventual return. Others expressed relief that a measure of justice had been served, though many in Felix's camp felt the sentence was insufficient for what they considered a calculated execution. Sheriff Pritchard, speaking to reporters afterward, captured the town's collective exhaustion. "There are no winners here. 2 families destroyed, a community divided, and a badge tarnished. Some wounds don't heal, they just become part of who we are." 3 weeks after the sentencing, Marin Langley listed the family home for sale. Neighbors watched silently as movers packed 17 years of memories into cardboard boxes. No farewell parties were held, no well-wishers stopped by with casseroles or offers of help. The community's judgment had been rendered long before the courts. "I can't stay here," Marin told Pastor Mills during their final meeting. "Every corner of this town holds a memory that's now poisoned." She relocated to Oklahoma City, changing back to her maiden name and finding work at a university library. Her parents remained her only regular contact from her former life. On social media, former friends from Red Bluff unfollowed her one by one, digital doors closing on a past she couldn't escape. Willow moved to Austin to live with her mother's sister, transferring to a large high school where anonymity provided a shield. The bright, artistic teenager became withdrawn, her counselor noting symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and identity crisis. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confided during therapy. "Everything I believed about myself feels like a lie." Her art became her primary outlet, dark, fragmented canvases exploring themes of broken identity and hidden truths. Her junior year exhibition, titled Fractured Reflections, earned attention from local critics who knew nothing of the personal tragedy behind the work. Meanwhile, Ranger Odessa Pike found herself haunted by the case long after the files were archived. She began speaking at law enforcement conferences about the psychological pressures facing officers and their families. "We train them to handle external threats," she told a roomful of police chiefs in Houston. "But we do almost nothing to prepare them for internal ones." The Langley case demonstrates how dangerous that oversight can be. Her advocacy led to a pilot program in 3 counties, providing mandatory psychological support services for officers and confidential counseling for their families. Red Bluff struggled to heal its divisions. The sheriff's department hired 2 new deputies but found itself under increased scrutiny from citizens who questioned whether other officers might be similarly capable of violence. Trust, once the town's foundation, had become its scarcest resource. At Cooley's Diner, the table where Everett once sat with fellow officers remained conspicuously empty during morning coffee hours, an unspoken memorial to what was lost. Conversations about the case gradually faded from public spaces, retreating behind closed doors where judgments could be voiced without consequence. Felix Navarro's medical practice was eventually purchased by a young doctor from Houston, but older patients still referred to it as Dr. Felix's office, their loyalty to his memory evident in the fresh flowers occasionally appearing on the building steps on the anniversary of his death. The high school discontinued its participation in the national DNA testing program, citing community concerns without further explanation. The biology curriculum was revised to focus on less personally revealing aspects of genetics. But the story doesn't end there. 8 years after the trial, a rental car with Austin plates pulled into Red Bluff. Behind the wheel sat Willow Langley, now Willow Whitfield, having taken her mother's maiden name during college. At 24, she graduated with honors in psychology and art therapy, her thesis exploring how creative expression helps process family trauma. She parked across from her childhood home, now weathered and vacant after multiple failed sales attempts. Weeds pushed through cracks in the driveway. The porch swing where she'd spent countless evenings sketching hung broken from one chain. Stepping onto the property felt like crossing a threshold between timelines, one where her family remained intact and the reality she'd lived through. She didn't attempt to enter the house, seeing the exterior was enough. Her next stop was the cemetery where Felix Navarro was buried. She placed a single white lily on the grave of the biological father she'd never known. The headstone was simple: his name, dates, and beloved physician. Nothing about fatherhood or the violent end to his life. At Cooley's Diner, a few old-timers recognized her despite the years and changes. Conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with deliberate casualness. The waitress, Lila, her former best friend, served her coffee without mentioning their shared past. "Just passing through?" Lila asked. "Needed to see it once more," Willow replied. "To make peace." Red Bluff had moved forward superficially. New businesses occupied Main Street storefronts. Different faces filled the sheriff's department. But beneath this progress, the case remained embedded in the town's identity, a cautionary tale about the dangers of secrets and the fragility of trust. For the younger generation, the story had become local legend, details blurred and exaggerated with each retelling. For those who lived through it, the wounds had scarred over but never fully healed. As Willow drove away that evening, she reflected on how a single revelation had collapsed the foundations of multiple lives. The truth, that sacred ideal, had proven more destructive than the lie it replaced. Yet she couldn't imagine continuing to live in ignorance either. How well do we really know the people we love? What secrets might be hiding in your own family tree? Sometimes the most devastating truths aren't found in criminal records or hidden diaries, but in the very cells that make us who we are. The tragedy of the Langley family forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about identity and forgiveness. When does a lie of omission become an unforgivable betrayal? Can 16 years of fatherhood be erased by a DNA test? Where is the line between justice and vengeance when our deepest truths are violated? Perhaps the most troubling lesson is how quickly a lifetime of honor can be undone by a single decision made in rage. Everett's badge represented justice until the moment he used it to facilitate murder, proving that none of us are immune to our darkest impulses when our foundations crumble. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Twisted True Crime for more compelling stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on what you would have done in Everett's position.